Kishibe, hop on the beat!
I've been a fan of JoJo for over a decade now, and I've come to love every part in the series, each for their unique aspects as well as how Araki's writing and art has evolved. However, being so familiar with JoJo has made me more and more drawn to some of the obscure and underappreciated aspects of the series. The one of these that I feel the most attachment to definitely has to be the long-running spin-off Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan, a mystery anthology series following Rohan from Part 4. In a video a while ago, I went over Rohan's character and how I believe he is the perfect choice as the narrator for all of these supernatural mysteries. Along with Rohan being one of my all-time favorite JoJo characters, I also believe that the Rohan stories are some of the best Araki has written. These stories being largely one-off events separated from the rest of the series lets Araki go totally off the rails with the concepts and write whatever the hell he wants. And when it comes to Araki, that's a high bar to clear. So in this video, I'd like to go over every Rohan chapter in order of release, give a refresher on what each of them are about, go over everything I like about each of them, and finally put together a definitive ranking of my favorite Rohan stories. First off, some ground rules. I'll only be covering the Rohan manga stories. So that includes the main Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan chapters, as well as the separate Rohan Goes to the Louvre and Rohan Meets Gucci stories. That means I won't be factoring in the Rohan light novel stories, mainly because the majority of them have not been translated, so I haven't read many of them. My other rule is that I'll try to avoid factoring in any adaptations for my ranking. Some of the chapters have been adapted into either Rohan OVA episodes or as part of the live-action TV drama. These adaptations vary quite a bit in quality in comparison to the original chapters. Some elevate the stories and adapt them perfectly, while others change a lot or drag them down in other ways. This ranking will be based on the chapters themselves, although I will bring up the adaptations as I go and give my thoughts on some of them. So without wasting any more time, let's start with the first ever Rohan chapter, episode 16, at a Confessional. The backstory of this chapter is actually pretty interesting, since back in 1997, the editorial team asked Araki to write a short story. He was given two terms, that it be less than 45 pages and not be a spin-off of an existing series. He initially wrote the first draft of the story without Rohan, but felt like it was missing something until he added him in. I'm not exactly sure how doing this let him get past the whole no spin-offs rule, but regardless, this gave us our first ever Rohan chapter and the start of everything to follow. This story follows Rohan on a trip to Italy where he investigates a church confession booth for inspiration. After going inside, he is inadvertently mistaken for a priest and a man begins confessing his sins to him. Rohan being Rohan, he can't resist going along with this and listens to the man's story. Right away we get one of the main Rohan tropes, his curiosity and thirst for inspiration for his manga getting him into all sorts of strange situations. I think the Rohan stories can be pretty neatly divided into two halves, chapters where Rohan is actually in the story and participates in its events, and ones where he is either barely connected to the plot or not at all. This first chapter is definitely in the latter category, with Rohan just listening in on someone else's story. The main focus of this chapter is the tale told by the confessor. He started off as a young man working when a vagrant shows up to ask for food. He cruelly puts the man to work while he slacks off, leading to the man's death. The ghost of the vagrant begins to haunt him and swears to return at the peak of his happiness. After this, the man becomes rich and builds a happy life where he has a daughter. One day while watching his daughter play, he reaches the peak of his happiness and the ghost returns possessing his daughter. The ghost decides to test his luck to prove if he should keep living, and forces him to play a game where he has to repeatedly throw popcorn in the air and catch it with his mouth. The stakes keep getting higher while birds intervene, climaxing with him setting the popcorn on fire to keep them away. However, the man messes up and is immediately killed by the ghost. This is when we reach the big twist of the chapter, that the confessor is actually alive to be able to tell Rohan the story. After becoming rich, he underwent plastic surgery to disguise himself as one of his servants, and had his servant do the same to take his place and fool the ghost. The story ends by showing that he is now haunted by both of their spirits, who swear to return to him at the peak of his daughter's happiness, while they try to make sure not to be fooled by him again. Rohan leaves the man be, saying that while he is a terrible person, he does respect how he continues to live with the curse. Overall, I think this is a very strong chapter. While Rohan does have a minimal role, the story actually still has one of my all-time favorite Rohan moments, since him not being able to resist posing as a priest here is just such a Rohan thing to do. Although compared to other Rohan stories, it does naturally suffer from his smaller role in it and the complete lack of Heaven's Door. The story itself feels like a classic ghost story, and the game the man is forced to play is both utterly ridiculous while also being oddly compelling and nail-biting. I also appreciate the sort of fable-like quality, with the man's cruel act coming back to hurt him later. That kind of simplicity actually makes it really charming. Art-wise, this is definitely the most unique of the chapters. Releasing years before the rest, it's the only one to have been published while the original continuity of JoJo was still going, right in the middle of Part 5's run. So the chapter has that super sharp look of Araki's art at the time. Later on, this chapter received an excellent adaptation in the Rohan OVA, and in 2025 received a film adaptation as part of the Rohan TV drama series, making it the second movie they've done so far. The movie actually does somewhat remedy my criticisms by expanding the story, creating an entirely new plot surrounding Rohan and the Confessor's adult daughter that continues after the confession. Although like I said, I won't be factoring adaptations into my ranking here. I think this chapter serves as a good start for the series, but with the lack of Rohan, I can't put it too high up. So to give this one a ranking, I'll be placing it at a solid B. Our next story is Episode 2, Mutsukabe Hill, releasing just over 10 years later in 2007. This is another one where Rohan takes a back seat, opening up with him meeting his editor Minoru for lunch. After a brief cameo from Tamami, as well as Akira, who apparently got out of jail at some point, Rohan reveals that he's lost his house and bankrupted himself after buying up a nearby mountain range. Rohan wanted to study a phenomenon in the area and bought it to stop a resort from being built there, but with the resort plan gone, the value went down and the land is now worthless. But he says that he did end up finding what he was looking for and shares the story of the demon of Mutsukabe Hill. The next part of the story is focused on a woman named Naoko Osato who is set to be married. She's having an affair with her gardener Gunpei and tries to pay him off and end the relationship. After a fight, Naoko accidentally knocks Gunpei into a golf bag, piercing his neck and killing him. Gunpei's body mysteriously shrivels up and starts bleeding in large amounts while Naoko tries to hide the body before her fiancé arrives. She manages to hide it just in time and is forced to drink the blood to keep it hidden. She later keeps the body in the attic where she continually disposes of the endless blood but remains in love with the corpse. We learn that Rohan later met Naoko and read her book with Heaven's Door, which is how he learned about all of this. While trying to learn what Gunpei is, Rohan meets Naoko's daughter who trips and dies in front of him, showing the same after-death symptoms as Gunpei. It turns out Naoko actually sired children with Gunpei's corpse, and this girl is their daughter. Rohan manages to revive her by writing in her book that she has never met him, allowing him to escape. We learn Gunpei and the daughter are both a kind of yokai, which have a second stage of life where they are cared for by the person they died in front of. Rohan remarks that Naoko seems to have built a happy life with her children and leaves. This is another solid Rohan chapter and an interesting concept on its own. The Mutsukabe yokai is a really cool idea, and I think it makes a good addition to the world of JoJo. While this is one of the chapters where Rohan is less present, he does still have a bearing on the story and is placed directly in danger during it, which works to the chapter's favor. I loved the way the story was presented here. We're first shown this seemingly unrelated scary story, and then we snap back to reality with Rohan, where we see him come to the horrifying revelation in real time. We get a good combination of suspense and horror, as well as the over-the-top scenes of trying to hide the body, which is the main draw here. Mutsukabe Hill always reminded me of the scary stories that you'd read as a kid, and in particular that story The Green Ribbon by Alvin Schwartz. He's most well known for the horror anthology series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is fitting with Thus Spoke basically being a horror anthology as well. I'm sure you remember the Green Ribbon story if you heard it before, but I always thought it had the same weird mix of horror and romance as this chapter. In the case of Mutsukabe Hill, that has the classic Araki twist on it by giving an explanation simply beyond being a ghost story, where the yokai is a kind of parasitic or symbiotic species existing in the natural world. Another odd detail of the story is the ending, which somehow manages to spin the concept into a mostly positive ending for Naoko, who seems to be content with the path her life has taken out of her love for Gunpei. This story was also adapted, first for the OVA and then again in the TV drama. I'd actually consider these some of the weaker episodes of both, and while the TV drama tries to show a bit more Rohan in it, it still doesn't reach the heights of some of the other episodes. For the manga though, I'd consider this an improvement over the first chapter, and I'd also place it at B. Next we have Rohan at the Louvre, a manga written as part of Araki's collaboration with the Louvre Museum in Paris. In 2009, Araki was chosen as one of 5 artists for the Louvre Invites the Comics event, and had his work displayed in the museum. As part of that, Araki wrote this 123-page one-shot, which follows Rohan on a trip to the Louvre to investigate a mysterious painting. This makes it the longest Rohan story ever published. Something else interesting about it is that it was actually translated into English in 2012, making it one of the only officially translated parts of JoJo at the time. The story starts by introducing us to a 17-year-old Rohan before he was an established artist, where he meets a woman named Nanase at his grandmother's inn. He falls in love with her and she tells him about an artist from 300 years ago named Nizaemon Yamamura, who discovered the darkest pigment in the world from an ancient tree and was put to death for chopping it down. Before he is killed, he places a curse on his own work. Most of his paintings were destroyed, but Nanase says that she has seen the last remaining evil painting before it was bought by the Louvre. Nanase leaves to meet her husband and returns a week later. Rohan wants to know more about her and considers reading her with Heaven's Door, but stops himself. After seeing herself in Rohan's drawings, she destroys them and disappears. 10 years later, Rohan is talking with the other Part 4 characters when the Mona Lisa is mentioned, which reminds Rohan of the Louvre and Nanase, so he heads to Paris to try and find the painting that she told him about. Once there, Rohan and the museum employees find out the painting is called Under the Moon and is stored underground in an abandoned wing of the museum. The painting was strangely forgotten about and left there, so Rohan is authorized to access it with the museum's curator Goucher, an interpreter, and 2 of the museum's firefighters. After finding the painting, the employees start to see visions of people from their past and begin dying mysteriously. One man recognizes someone from the battlefield and appears to be shot. Goucher recognizes someone from a car crash and is run over. And the interpreter sees her son who drowned and after coming near him drowns herself. Rohan also recognizes his grandparents in the crowd and is attacked. Nanase comes out of the painting asking for Rohan's forgiveness. We learn that the painting makes people from your past appear, and if you touch them, you die the way they died. Realizing this, Rohan uses Heaven's Door to erase all of his memories, causing the ghosts to disappear. Thanks to having left a message to himself to erase the writing, Rohan is able to restore his memories after getting away. We learn that the pigment used in the painting is actually comprised of groups of spider-like insects, and the infinitely black painting trapped Nizaemon's hatred inside of it. As a result, the insects attack whoever sees it, punishing people for their past crimes or regrets. After returning home, Rohan researches the painter and finds out that his wife's name was Nanase Kishibe, one of his ancestors. Nizaemon had painted a portrait of her before she also died, and she lived on as a ghost to seal away his hatred. The reason she destroyed Rohan's drawings and left was to prevent Rohan from dying like the others, since he would have been attacked through his love for her. Rohan understands why she cried as she was leaving, since she and Nizaemon are now free. At the end of the story, it notes that the painting was supposedly burned, but that Rohan can't verify if that's true. I very much enjoy Rohan at the Louvre. Story-wise, I think it's one of the more complicated Rohan stories, and it took me a couple read-throughs to actually understand what went on. Having understood it, I do think it tells a pretty touching story, and the concept of the painting and how it deals with the afterlife is very interesting. I appreciate it giving us a look at Rohan's past and one of his ancestors, even if it conflicts with the story of Part 4 a bit. The biggest highlight of this manga though is the art, which I consider to be some of the best that Araki has ever drawn. The full manga is in color, and you just have page after page of beautiful artwork in Araki's late Part 7 style. This one is somewhat hard to find to read online, so I actually recommend you seek out the physical book itself, which is cheap and very easy to find on Amazon. Seeing the art on the page itself is always the most ideal way to read the manga, and in this case, it is a must. I actually also recommend checking out the movie adaptation of this story that was done as part of the TV drama series. Of course, being a movie, it fleshes out the story a ton, and with the added scenes, I think I actually prefer the way the film tells it. Overall, Rohan at the Louvre is excellent, and I'll be placing it in the A tier. Next, we have another collaboration story, this time as part of Araki's crossover with Gucci. Rohan Meets Gucci was published in 2011 in the women's fashion magazine Spur, celebrating the 90th anniversary of Gucci and the 30th anniversary of Araki's manga career. This is the shortest Rohan story at just 16 pages, although like the Louvre story, it is fully colored and beautiful all the way through. In this one, Rohan travels to the Gucci workshop in Florence with a mysterious Gucci bag left to him by his grandmother. The bag has a strange property where any money that's placed in it will disappear. Rohan asks the craftsman there to repair the bag to stop this from happening. He tells Rohan that this is one of 3 bags made by a genius artisan years ago and questions if Rohan really understands how to use the bag's power. After having the bag fixed, Rohan is abandoned by his interpreter and left with no money on the side of the road. It starts raining, but Rohan miraculously finds an umbrella and then a cow pie that he can light on fire for warmth. Rohan gets to a hotel but can't stay since he has no money, but a man recognizes his Gucci umbrella and pays him €60 for it. Rohan realizes that the bag had a stand ability that performs an equivalent exchange, taking the money and then giving back that amount of good fortune in return when you're in danger. However, since the bag has been fixed, it was just paying out the last bit of good fortune and won't take any more money. Rohan regrets having it fixed, and while he has a place to stay, he has nothing to eat. While this is definitely a super short story, I actually really enjoy this one. The art, of course, is gorgeous and heavily features real Gucci designs worn by the characters. And I find the idea of the bag pretty interesting, since much of Araki's work at the time also used the concept of equivalent exchange. Being so short though, it doesn't get to do as much with that concept as it could, and parts of the manga feel more like a collection of artwork than cohesive scenes, so I'll also be putting this one in the B tier. Now we get back to the proper Rohan chapters with episode 5, Millionaire Village. Following the 2 collaboration pieces, this story released in 2012 and marks the start of the long line of Rohan chapters we've gotten since. The story starts with Rohan having a meeting with his editor Kyoka Izumi, who tells him that she's interested in buying a villa in the mountains. The villa is part of a mysterious isolated community surrounded by forest, and everyone who lives there bought their house at age 25 and went on to become extremely wealthy. Kyoka is also 25 and so is interested in buying one. This intrigues Rohan, who decides to come along. The 2 hike to the villas with Kyoka telling Rohan that the owners pay close attention to manners and refuse to sell to anyone who is rude. After picking up a baby bird outside, they're welcomed in by the village's child caretaker Ikkyu. They're led to a tea room and left alone and wonder if their manners are already being tested. After Kyoka drinks some tea, Ikkyu immediately returns to tell them that they failed their test. They broke the rules of etiquette 3 times, first by stepping on the borders of the tatami mats in the room, then by sitting in the improper chairs for guests, and finally from Kyoka holding the teacup incorrectly. Kyoka asks to try again, but she receives a phone call telling her that her mother and fiancé have died in an accident, while Rohan discovers the baby bird dead in his pocket. Rohan reads Ikkyu with Heaven's Door, learning that the child isn't a stand user, but a representative of the gods of the mountains, and that whenever someone breaches manners, they lose something close to them. Because Rohan breached manners by reading Ikkyu, Kyoka also begins to die. Rohan regrets having Kyoka put in this situation just to give him inspiration for his manga and asks for her to be forgiven. Rohan is then given a test of manners on how to properly eat corn on the cob. Rohan passes the test by ignoring the provided utensils and picking up the corn with his hands, which is the proper way of eating it. He also points out that Ikkyu has breached manners by stepping on the mat borders, since Rohan had written in him for him to do so. Kyoka is revived and Rohan takes her home, refusing any further tests. Outside, the baby bird also comes back to life, showing that the other deaths were reversed. This one has always been one of my favorite Rohan chapters and is the one I think of as the perfect format for these type of stories. We have an interesting hook and mystery with a community of villas and some well-executed horror, 2 of my favorite aspects of Araki's work. I also love how the climax of the story is based around a non-violent battle of manners, a completely bizarre concept that nonetheless still has some expertly written suspense. The real highlight of the chapter for me though is Rohan's characterization, since we get to see his rude and abrasive side that we love, as well as some genuine humanity through his regret with Kyoka. One of the best things about the Rohan chapters are its original characters, and this one most notably introduces Rohan's editor Kyoka, who has gone on to become one of my favorites not just here, but in the entire JoJo series. The 2 have a chemistry that I just love, since she's like Rohan's polar opposite, always being upbeat and sometimes oblivious, which leads to a clash between them as artist and editor. The art here is also another good showcase of Araki's modern style, and I always liked the way it gets more and more hectic and abstract as the pressure gets turned on in the story. This chapter was later adapted quite well into the first episode of the OVA, and then as the excellent debut for the TV drama. One of the most notable things about the TV drama is that it elevated the role of Kyoka to a secondary lead, making her part of every episode and giving a ton of focus to the interactions between her and Rohan. This works so well for the drama that it even seems to have led to Araki bringing her back in more recent chapters. This is an excellent Rohan story and one that set the standard for everything after, and I'll be placing it firmly in the S tier. For our next chapter, we have episode 6, Poaching Seashore. Releasing in 2013, this chapter is most notable for being the return of Tonio from the original manga, something that as a big Part 4 fan immediately drew me to the story. It starts with Rohan eating a dish at Tonio's restaurant, which cures his eye strain. Tonio asks Rohan for a favor to help him obtain some special abalone from Morioh's coastline as an ingredient. The catch being that the abalone are protected and catching them would be considered illegal poaching. This just makes Rohan more interested and he agrees to come along. They head to the coastline and Rohan questions why Tonio needs the ingredient and remembers a girl he spotted at the restaurant. The girl is Tonio's girlfriend, who has an incurable brain tumor that Pearl Jam is not able to remove with his current ingredients. They find the school of abalone, but Rohan notices that Tonio has disappeared underwater, having been weighed down while trying to catch them. The same happens to Rohan, and he finds the skeletons of past poachers on the sea floor. He realizes that the location of the abalone was published as a trap to lure poachers to their deaths. Rohan escapes by using Heaven's Door on a nearby octopus, ordering it to attack the abalone. Back at the restaurant, we see that they both made it out alive, and Rohan and the others are enjoying an octopus dish. The chapter ends with Rohan asking for some abalone, but he stops after seeing Tonio and his now healed girlfriend. This is another favorite of mine, and another story that I think perfectly captures Rohan. The idea of Rohan going on this little adventure just from being interested in committing a crime is a great Rohan-like setup, and I think it does a good job of portraying the main arc of Rohan's character. He has an unquenchable curiosity that he continues chasing, leading to him putting himself in danger. But he has a respect for history and an understanding of the natural forces of the world, which is what allows him to always escape unharmed. Another big highlight is of course the return of Tonio, and I think it gives a good amount of focus to him beyond his original Part 4 appearance, introducing a bit of backstory and emotion we haven't seen from him before. This is also another chapter where the art shines, and one thing I really like is how much it does without words. Long stretches of the chapter, particularly when they're underwater, have very little dialogue from Rohan and just let his reactions carry the plot. Even the ending very tastefully uses some show don't tell, leaving it on a nice note with Tonio's girlfriend now healed and Rohan looking quietly satisfied. This chapter was later adapted into the 4th season of the TV drama, which retools Tonio's original Part 4 arc to introduce him and then leads into Poaching Seashore itself. They actually cast an Italian actor to play Tonio, and I think he hits all the notes of the character very well. It also adds some more development to Tonio's girlfriend, even giving us a bonus episode just showing a conversation between her and Kyoka. Like I said before, this chapter is one of my favorites, and I think it captures everything I like from a Rohan story, with the added bonus of utilizing one of my favorite JoJo side characters. So I'm definitely placing it in the A tier. For our next story, we have episode 4, Harvest Moon, also titled The Mochizuki Family Moon Viewing. This one released in 2014, and notably for me was the first Rohan chapter to release after I got into JoJo. I actually remember seeing the preview for this before it came out when a bunch of people were thinking that this character is an aged up Josuke. However, that turned out not to be the case. This is another story where Rohan takes a back seat, and in this case it is the most disconnected he has ever been from a story, only appearing at the beginning to introduce the chapter. Starting with Rohan, he introduces us to the members of the Mochizuki family, and that the day of the harvest moon is important to them. The Mochizuki family have a curse. Every member of their family dies on September 8th, the day of the harvest moon. While many of their ancestors have been killed in accidents, such as an allergic reaction to a hornet sting, some have managed to happily live to old age, which is said to be due to them abiding by a tradition of viewing the moon with their family. The father, Noboru, is adamant that everyone stay home for their safety, while the kids of the family don't believe the story and want to go out. Having recently learned that his wife has cervical cancer, Noboru believes that if she survives past midnight, she is guaranteed to live for another year and her treatment will go well. The family sets up an extravagant party in their backyard, and we start to see them narrowly avoid death. A falling branch catapults a goldfish into their grandmother's mouth, but the father accidentally popping their swimming pool causes the son's RC helicopter to fall and dislodge the fish. We then see the water carrying away a nearby hornet's nest to a sewer grate. That night, the daughter receives a call from her boyfriend asking to meet her. While she initially resists, she eventually gives in and goes to meet him outside. As she leaves, a being known as the Moon Rabbit appears, who is the one behind the family's curse. He creates a wind to make her drop her jacket and pick up the hornets that washed into the grate. Just as she is about to be stung, the boyfriend proposes to her and she accepts, meaning she is no longer a member of the family and is free from the curse. As a result, the death is moved to a nearby biker and the daughter returns to the party with her fiancé. The chapter ends with the Moon Rabbit departing, saying that it will return each year to find someone avoiding the moon viewing. I always found this chapter really interesting, first of all for having an almost complete lack of Rohan. While I consider Rohan to be the biggest draw to this series, this one does still manage to pull off a unique and interesting story without him. The concept of the family curse and the Moon Rabbit is one I really enjoy here, and that was similarly portrayed in the plot of JoJolion, which is running at the same time as this. As a result, I actually think the appearance of the curse is really helpful for our understanding of how Araki writes curses and fate in his other manga. I also find the story itself very nice, and I enjoy the character of the father quite a bit, being both obsessed with the danger to his family but also seeing it as a sign of prosperity as long as they abide by tradition, since they'll be invincible for any other day of the year. I also find the portrayal of the daughter very touching, and I love the way Araki shows her wordless reaction to her boyfriend's call, since we can only imagine what he said to her for them to agree to meet. I also find this chapter to be one of the funniest ones, with the members of the family all being eccentric. And in particular, I really love how the son keeps bringing up that he wants to watch the movie Paul. In the end, the story is quite nice with the family all making it through the night. Like I said before, I really enjoy the portrayal of the curse as a sentient supernatural being, something I think Araki tries to touch on in a lot of his work, such as through the introduction of stands in JoJo. Overall, another good chapter. Although it does suffer from the lack of Rohan, I think it makes up for that with the story itself, so I'm placing this one high in the B tier. Next we have episode 7, A Rainy Monday. Releasing in 2015, this one is what I'd call a very standard Rohan chapter, meaning while it does hit all the beats, I just don't find myself thinking of it all that often. This story starts with Rohan walking through a subway station when people keep accidentally bumping into him and he finds that everyone is distracted by their phones. He bumps into a fat guy, and yeah, I have to call him that since he doesn't have a name, but unlike the others, he apologizes and acts normal. After another collision, Rohan falls onto the train tracks. The fat man offers to help Rohan, but he doesn't trust him since he thinks there's an enemy attack at work. He gets knocked down too, and Rohan uses Heaven's Door to unfurl him into a book to cleverly push them out of the way of the trains. After reading him, Rohan concludes he isn't an enemy and was just a good guy trying to help him get back up. The book also notes that the man has a chronic heart condition. Rohan wonders what kind of force is really behind what's going on, and the man points out that he's had the same experience as Rohan with people distracted by phones. As more trains approach, the people falling onto the tracks keep piling up, and everyone trying to press the emergency stop falls in too. Rohan finally realizes what is happening when all of the falling people surround the fat man who has fallen unconscious. Strange insects emerge from their phones and crawl onto him. We're told through narration that these are a newly discovered creature that lives inside electronics and feeds on electromagnetic waves. The insects absorb electricity from phones and then seek out individuals with weak hearts to manipulate and feed on their bioelectricity. Rohan remembers that the man had a heart condition and his body was already on its last legs, but he regrets not trusting him earlier and wishes that there was something he could have done. It's revealed that the man was the sole casualty of the incident, since Rohan had earlier written in one of the rail workers to drive a truck to stop the train. Rohan calls back to the title by saying that the recent rainy season must be the breeding period for these creatures. He notices them on a nearby woman and comments that he at least has a new idea for a manuscript. This is yet another nice chapter. While I like the concept of the phone insects, I do think the story didn't quite use them as much as it should have, and I would have liked to see some more resolution on the idea, since I find it a little odd that Rohan just accepts the existence of these creatures and moves on a kind of foreboding note where they may continue to prey on people in the future. Part of me always thinks the inspiration behind this story comes from Araki having a kind of boomer moment in public by noticing everybody stuck to their phones, which always gives me a laugh when I'm reading the opening pages here. And it's always nice to see Rohan get progressively more and more annoyed by something. probably my favorite thing from the chapter is the character of the fat man, and the moment where Rohan regrets not believing that he's just a genuinely good guy always tugs at my heartstrings here. And his death in the chapter, with it being acknowledged as unavoidable, is really sad, since he really was just a nice guy who wanted to help people but was swept up in this whole situation through no fault of his own, and that makes the existence of the creatures a lot scarier since we see them move on to their next target. I initially thought I might end up placing this one in the C tier, but after revisiting the story, I actually got a lot more out of it, so I say this one will go to the bottom of the A tier. Now we move on to episode 8, DNA. This one released in 2017 in the shoujo manga magazine Bisatsu Margaret. It's also notable for giving us the return of Yukiko as our guest character, although unlike Tonio, she isn't the main attraction here and just plays a supporting role. The story starts by showing us a car accident with a man and a woman, where the man is shown to have strange mannerisms. Flashing forward, Yukiko introduces the woman from before as one of her friends, Mai Katahira, who has a 3-year-old daughter named Mao. She says that after her husband died, people urged her to remarry, but she hasn't been able to meet anyone. Wanting to still have a daughter, she conceived her using a sperm bank. However, Mao has a series of odd characteristics, such as speaking backwards, strange eyelashes, walking with wet feet, and a tail that allows her to camouflage. Yukiko tells Rohan that she wants him to use his stand to make Mao normal, but by reading her, Rohan realizes that Mao doesn't have any kind of disease. The tail and her other features are an extension of her heart, like a sort of physical stand ability. Rohan refuses to change her and questions Mai's view of what she considers normal. Rohan leaves, but Yukiko mentions having spotted something in Mao's book, that her father lives in Yamagata and has a scar on his forehead. Later, Mai wonders about where the father might be when she spots a man who shares some of Mao's features along with the scar. She follows him to the playground where she sees him picking up Mao and taking her away. She runs to stop him but realizes it's just Mao playing a prank by putting her camouflage over the man's son. She apologizes to the man, whose name we learn is Obanazawa. He tells her that he is a single father and his scar came from a hiking accident as a young man. After the accident, he actually died for a moment, but after being revived, his personality changed. Mai notices that Obanazawa has all of the mannerisms of her late husband, including his job as a lawyer, which her husband aspired to be, and the two both feel like they've met each other before. Later, Yukiko tells Rohan that Mai and Obanazawa have gotten married, and that he was actually Mao's biological father, with Mao unconsciously knowing this and bringing the two together. At the end, Rohan plays it off, but is quietly happy that everything worked out. This is another chapter that I really love. Like I said before, Rohan does have a smaller role here, but his role is very important to the plot itself, which I think makes up for that. It also gives me one of my all-time favorite Rohan moments when he refuses to alter Mao's features. I think this is a perfect example of Rohan as a character. He is someone who is curious and fascinated with the world around him, and views Mao as she is as an equally valid part of that world. Despite his abrasive nature, Rohan recognizes the value of every person's unique existence as part of the reality he's seeking, and would never force a change on them for the sake of someone else. And we see that Rohan's refusal pays off by leading to the meeting of Mai and Obanazawa. He's another interesting character, since beyond being Mao's father, the chapter subtly implies that he is the reincarnation of Mai's husband, having been reborn with his soul following the accident. The meeting between the two here is one of my favorite moments, and I love the shock as she slowly recognizes everything about her husband through him. And I think it portrays this love at first sight in a really beautiful way, with her just wordlessly having that realization and them walking off together. This chapter was later adapted into the 3rd episode of the TV drama as the end of its 1st season. This one saw a lot of changes, first off by making Rohan more involved in the plot. It also heavily tied into Kyoka, with us being introduced to her boyfriend Taro across the previous 2 episodes. Taro is the stand-in for the Obanazawa character here, although with some notable changes. He's no longer the biological father of Mao, and we also have the added detail of Taro actually receiving the dead husband's organs in a transplant after his accident, giving a more direct connection between the two. I kinda prefer the more spiritual connection of the original though, and I don't find Taro nearly as charming as Obanazawa is. This story also has the added aspect of Kyoka letting Taro go with Mai, which does give her a good character moment, and like I said, more Rohan is always good, but for this one, I definitely prefer the manga. With DNA being a chapter I really love, I just have to place it in the S tier. Next is episode 9, The Run. This chapter released in 2018 and is the last to come out within JoJolian's run. This one starts with some foreboding narration from Rohan appearing with a cast on his hand. He mentions that his accident occurred because of a flaw in his own personality and his tendency to cross a line. The story properly begins with us being introduced to the aspiring model Yoma Hashimoto. We walk through his career as a model with his intense workout routine, which leads to a rift forming between him and his girlfriend as he becomes more and more dedicated to it. Yoma starts acting colder towards her and is shown to have fits of anger against the delivery man. His obsession gets more out of hand as his bouldering wall takes over their apartment, causing the two to break up. We come back to Rohan, who is working out on a treadmill, and we learn about a game he played with Yoma, where the two keep speeding up on the treadmill and compete on who can grab the stop remote first after reaching a certain speed. Yoma becomes obsessed with beating Rohan, who sees that Yoma has started to change, including developing wing-shaped muscles on his body. Yoma displays incredible physical feats such as running backwards at high speeds, and he shatters the window behind them, turning their game into a death match for whoever falls off. By using Heaven's Door, Rohan learns that Yoma murdered his girlfriend, the delivery man, and some of the fellow gym patrons that disturbed his training. Yoma finally grabs the remote, but Rohan had written in him for him to stop his machine instead, saving Rohan while Yoma plummets out the window. Rohan thinks to himself that Yoma is surely still alive and that the wing-shaped muscles identify him as an avatar of the Greek god of muscle, Hermes. Knowing that any further curiosity would lead to his own death, Rohan says there's nothing to do but run away from it. This is a fantastic Rohan chapter. Once again, Rohan plays a smaller role, but only for the beginning section which establishes Yoma. And that leads to a nice effect where Rohan introduces the story and makes us wonder when he might reappear. Yoma is the real highlight here and is a completely terrifying character. I find his role as an avatar of Hermes to be quite interesting, and it actually has played a big role in my understanding of JoJo's supernatural forces as a whole, and brings me back to Araki's original idea of stands as classic psychic powers given visible form. The most effective aspect of the story is how well it gets you swept up in the momentum of Rohan's feelings. It is genuinely impressive that Araki is able to portray the treadmill race with a series of still images, and still have you feel the physical movement from it as Rohan gets pushed to his absolute limit. My favorite moment here has to be right at the end, when Rohan just knows that if he tries looking down at Yoma, he'll be killed. It really sells how Rohan is just inches away from instant death, and it's a perfect contrast with his own undying curiosity and where Rohan tries to avoid crossing that line that'll really be the end of him. This chapter later received an OVA adaptation with what I think is the best of the animated Rohan chapters. David Production totally nailed the momentum and high stakes of the treadmill battle and shows the story in a really great way. Similarly, the TV drama handled this one well in its second season, and Issei Takahashi as Rohan really nails the terror from him. This is one of the single best Rohan chapters, and I can confidently put it in S tier. Now we have episode 10, Hot Summer Martha. This chapter released in 2022 in the first issue of the JoJo magazine, shortly following the conclusion of JoJolion. It sits at 71 pages long, making it the longest Rohan chapter, not counting the Louvre. This chapter is most notable for being the first Araki work to portray the 2020s, showing Rohan's reaction to the pandemic forcing him indoors. The story starts by showing us Rohan's life in the pandemic, having recently adopted a puppy named Bakin. He speaks over the phone with Kyoka about the design of one of his new manga characters, Hot Summer Martha. It has a design featuring 3 circles, which Kyoka fears will cause a copyright issue with Disney by resembling Mickey Mouse. Rohan maintains that the 3 circles are essential to the design and wants to keep them. Outside, Rohan is cheered at by an obsessive fangirl named Eve who carries around her pet crocodile. He expresses his frustration at the pandemic restricting his work and creativity. He decides to take Bakin for a walk and comes upon an ancient tree at a Shinto shrine. Inside the base of the tree, Rohan discovers a mirror, and after a moment emerges to go back home. Rohan starts to notice strange things like a text from Kyoka about his chapter which isn't supposed to be finished yet, and Bakin's teeth coming in early. Rohan discovers his manuscript and is horrified that Hot Summer Martha's design has been changed, making him angrily phone Kyoka. But she tells him that he already gave her the chapter without issue 2 weeks ago. Rohan discovers Eve in his bed, who acts like they're in a relationship. He realizes that 3 months have passed and sees a recording of himself letting Eve in. Rohan heads back to the tree where he meets 2 monks, who tell him that being reflected in the mirror summons a yokai called the Yabubako Hoshi. This being acts like a darker version of yourself that replaces you as a doppelganger while you remain in the tree. He is told that if you manage to turn the mirror around without being reflected in it, the actions of the Yabubako Hoshi will be undone. Rohan attempts this using Heaven's Door, but realizes he failed after returning home, finding Bakin fully grown and having killed the crocodile, seemingly after abuse from Rohan's counterpart. Upstairs, Rohan is enraged with a new design of Hot Summer Martha, already having a figurine now that 3 months have gone by. He finds Kyoka drugged and unconscious and is surprised by Eve, who injects him as well. She had attacked Kyoka out of jealousy and is shown to be pregnant with Rohan's child. She tries to have Kyoka die in front of them to make them accomplices and force him to stay with her forever. While Eve knows about Rohan's power and tries to avoid it, he tempts her by opening his own book so she can read if he really loves her. The trick works, and Rohan commands Eve to go to the shrine and turn the mirror herself, undoing the actions of Rohan's double. With Kyoka and Bakin back to normal, Rohan spots the doppelganger of Eve outside, who seems to leave him alone. At the end of the chapter, Rohan discovers that Hot Summer Martha is unchanged, since it was actually the doing of Kyoka. Hot Summer Martha is an incredible Rohan story. Of course, with it being the first published work from Araki following the hiatus at the end of JoJolion, receiving such a long and well-written chapter was a huge event for me and many other readers. This sort of ushered us into a new era for JoJo, with us now getting spin-off one-shots releasing left and right, and so much more JoJo content with the frequent release of the JoJo magazine. The story itself is great, and I love the way Araki brought us into the present day with Rohan's reaction to the pandemic. Araki similarly used the then contemporary era of the Tohoku earthquake to establish JoJolion's setting, and he does the same here to great effect. This really gets across Rohan's main goal as our guide through a varied set of stories, and putting us in an entirely new environment for him really helps give us his perspective. The chapter also introduced Bakin, Rohan's adorable dog that has since been a recurring element of his stories, and the return of Kyoka following her expanded role in the TV drama. Kyoka really is one of my favorite JoJo characters, and it's great to see her back. And I think this chapter did the perfect job of showcasing the clashing writer and editor relationship that they have. I think Araki expertly captured the feeling of lost time brought on by the pandemic, with having Rohan literally jump forward in his life, and him having to deal with the actions of his darker self brings some great horror to the chapter. We also have the ostensible main antagonist of the chapter, Eve. I really enjoyed her character and the contrast between her upbeat personality and secretly crazy nature. I no doubt see the influence of works like Stephen King's Misery with the character, which Araki has previously said helped inspire his portrayal of Yukiko in Part 4. This chapter was later adapted into the first episode of the TV drama's 3rd season, and manages to hit all the same beats of the chapter quite well. Overall, Hot Summer Martha gives us some great relatability with Rohan, humor, suspense, horror, and yet another interesting supernatural concept that culminates in a fantastic Rohan chapter. All that said, I consider Hot Summer Martha to be my favorite Rohan story, and I'm placing it right at the top of the S tier. Next we come to episode 11, Drip Painting Style. This chapter is unique among the series for releasing in 2 parts in April and May of 2022. The chapter came very shortly after Hot Summer Martha and was our last Araki story from the hiatus between parts 8 and 9. This story starts with Kyoka and Bakin walking in on Rohan working on his newest chapter. Kyoka gets up to some Kyoka nonsense to prank him, but finds Rohan tearing up. He tells her that his story is about an interview he had with someone about climate emissions, and that Rohan is obligated to write it even if it doesn't have a happy ending. We then change focus to a woman named Mitsuki Murase, who is cheating on her husband. She gets in her car and starts worrying about if he gets suspicious of her. She starts heading to pick up her daughter from kindergarten and spots a mysterious spiked figure following behind her car. She stops and doesn't notice any damage and continues to drive. Then a car pulls up behind her and starts flashing its lights, which she believes to be an SUV that she minorly damaged back at the hotel. The car pulls up alongside her and sprays a fire extinguisher at her windshield. Moving into the second part of the story, Mitsuki continues to be chased by the mysterious driver who breaks her window with the extinguisher. The car pulls up beside her again and we see that the driver is Rohan trying to warn her about someone in her back seat. The spiked figure reappears behind Mitsuki, breaking her neck and killing her. The cars crash and Rohan calls the police before confronting the killer. The man turns out to be an eco-terrorist who knows Rohan and begins telling him about the advancing climate crisis. He was a member of an environmental organization but was laid off when their leader was bribed by a deforesting corporation. For trying to continue his work, he was repeatedly arrested and then abandoned by his family. Rohan begs him to stop and not to get other people involved, and the man reveals his plan to destroy Morioh's power plant in a bombing. We learn that this is the person mentioned by Rohan earlier and that they had met at his house to discuss the environment. The man says that he knows he's going to be killed and that if he were to tell his story to the press, it would be censored. So he wants Rohan to tell it in the form of his manga and lured Rohan to the outskirts of town where he would be safe from the explosion. Rohan again begs him to spare his town, but the man moves forward with his plan. Rohan notices that Mitsuki's car is gas-powered and wondered if this is an ironic coincidence or a message from the mountain gods. Using Heaven's Door on nearby plants, he fills them with carbon monoxide and sends them to the terrorists, knocking them out as the police arrive. We come back to Rohan and Kyoka, and he kicks her out for making a mess by eating near his work. Outside, Kyoka says that she did it on purpose to cheer Rohan up and questions if the end of the story was happy or not. I definitely feel like this is the most peculiar Rohan story. Of course, a lot of that comes from its ambiguous nature, with the framing device of Rohan at a low point chronicling this story while knowing it has no happy outcome. The story is notably split between two parts, and that goes beyond simply the two-chapter structure of it. We have the first half following Mitsuki and her fears surrounding her affair and ensuing car chase, and then Rohan's story dealing with the eco-terrorist. Now, I feel like both of these stories on their own are promising, but I don't think it entirely fits together. I'd really like to see more of Mitsuki's story, and I think having a car chase act as a manifestation of her own guilt and fear makes for a good story. And I also find the story with the eco-terrorist interesting, and it's something that once again pushes Rohan to his limit as we see his connection to Morioh being tested. But having the Mitsuki story cut short for us to learn it isn't really related is kind of disappointing. We see a common Araki trope here, which is the repurposing of a common scary story with a new twist on it. Here it's the one where you think you're being chased only for them to be trying to warn you that someone is in the back seat. Araki has done this a few times, notably back in part 4 with Reimi's backstory involving Kira under her bed being a pre-existing story. I can also see some of the influence of Steven Spielberg's Duel in this chapter, which Araki previously referenced with the Wheel of Fortune fight in part 3. I think this chapter has the potential to really benefit from being adapted in the TV drama, since I feel like that's an opportunity to really expand on some of the less fleshed out parts of the story. I do think there are some good moments here, but it doesn't totally stick the landing for me, so as a result I'll be putting Drip Painting Style in the C tier. Finally, we have the newest Rohan chapter, episode 12, Bruschetta. This was the first chapter to be released during part 9's run, releasing in April of 2025. This chapter opens with a conversation between Rohan and Kyoka about an idea for his next chapter, which will focus on the theme of evolution. He points out the way athletes break records over time and the evolution of art and manga being examples of Darwinian evolution. He spots a strange young girl who appears to have been swimming and warns her not to cross over into his property. Rohan reveals to Kyoka that he's actually at his villa in Hawaii, and expects her to fly out to him to get his manuscript. Rohan came to Hawaii to study the isolated evolution of the birds, much like what is seen on the Galapagos Islands. Inside, Rohan makes himself some bruschetta and starts hearing strange sounds from different areas of the house. He notices that the sounds are echoing his own, eventually being led outside where he meets the girl again. He sees a strange substance coming from the girl's ears, and Rohan realizes that the sounds are echoing from inside himself. Rohan begins showing the same symptoms as the girl and reads her with Heaven's Door. The girl's name is Soa, and she and her family have been afflicted by a condition for 9 days which heightens their hearing, making most actions deafeningly loud. In his own book, Rohan reads that he is healthy, but has an unknown substance in his body. Some snails crawl by, and the sounds of their movements are so loud that they make Rohan fall to the ground and vomit. He notices moths landing and consuming the snails, and reads in Soa's book that snails are particularly dangerous to the condition and should be avoided. As more moths swarm in, we learn that they are a unique species evolved on the island, and when the dust created by their flying enters the body, it makes people sensitive to the sounds of the moth's prey, having them act as food detectors for them. Rohan manages to read one of the moths and learns that they have an aversion to a certain chemical compound, which Rohan can get from the eucalyptus tree in his backyard. After being cured, Rohan notes that the moths came about due to the island's life energy. He notices that Soa must have swam across the bay from her parents' house and somehow managed to scale a cliff, showing that she was actually an evolved being as well. This is another pretty good chapter. There may be some recency bias at work here, so I think I won't fully appreciate the chapter until I've been able to read it some more over the years. With what we have though, I still really enjoy it. This one is similar to Rainy Monday, with Rohan meeting a new creature that puts him in danger and the creature continuing to exist after Rohan gets away. The main focus here, as Rohan says, is evolution, and I really liked the ways that theme was explored in the chapter. The moths have a stone mask motif, which I think is a nice nod towards the idea of evolution in the main JoJo series, with the mask acting as a tool of evolution from human to vampire and the growth of the Pillarmen's abilities. Although the discovery of the cure for the moths is a bit anticlimactic, I do think it was actually pretty clever. Since the moths evolved such a specialized ability on the island, they're at an advantage from being in their natural habitat. So their weakness comes from something that is not native to the island, namely the eucalyptus trees, which were only introduced to Hawaii in the 1800s. The trees are of course native to Australia and are actually an invasive species that seeps chemicals into the soil that prevent other species from growing, so having something foreign to the moths and therefore not considered in their evolution makes sense for a weakness. I also think the same is true for Rohan himself. Much like how Rohan had to use the trees to cure the illness, the native girl Soa was drawn to Rohan for help, and his unique ability is what led to them being saved. This chapter also serves as a nod to Rohan's appearance in Part 9, with his villa in Hawaii making an appearance. Rohan also makes mention of a burglary from a year prior, referencing the events of Jodio's heist early in the story. Of course, the spin-off isn't directly connected to the Part 7 to 9 continuity like it is with the original one. In the Part 9 Rohan would be classified as his own character, but I think Araki has written the newer chapters in a way that lets him reference both without interfering in the story. Overall, it's a nice chapter, but not one I'd consider among the best at this point in time, so I'll be putting it in the B tier. And that's every chapter of the Thus Spoke Kishibe Rohan series. I absolutely adore this manga, and I believe it is one of Araki's greatest works. Beyond giving a spotlight to one of my all-time favorite manga characters, I think this series gives Araki room to flex his already bizarre supernatural concepts even more than usual. The end result is a beautifully done anthology full of mystery, suspense, and horror, but also with some touching commentary on love and humanity, with the balance between those two sides being what JoJo and all of Araki's work is about. I'm really glad I got the opportunity to take a look back at this manga and finally get all my thoughts out there. If you haven't already, I also hope you have some newfound appreciation for the Rohan series, and if you're willing, I absolutely recommend checking out the chapters you haven't read, as well as the adaptations and whichever of the short novel stories you can get your hands on. While I went over a lot of it in this video, I also have a ton of thoughts on the Rohan TV drama, which I think works as an incredible adaptation of these stories, and nobody else truly embodies Rohan the way Issei Takahashi does. I'd also like to hear your own thoughts on each Rohan chapter and where your opinion might differ from mine. I'm definitely interested in seeing people's opinions and if there's anything I missed when it comes to these stories. This is the first time I've done something like this for my channel and it was really fun, so if there's any other kind of ranking videos you'd like to see when it comes to JoJo, let me know in the comments. If you want to stay updated on future videos, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. You can also join the Ham and Beat Discord to get notified on new uploads and any important JoJo news. Finally, I'd appreciate if you help support the channel on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member below. Supporters get their names featured at the end of every video and can submit viewer questions. This video's question comes from Arios. They ask, have I considered going back and reviewing the past JoJo parts, like I have for the JoJo Lands and part of JoJolion? Now, as far as a chapter-by-chapter review, I think that's definitely not the way I'd go about it. But I would like to make some retrospectives on the parts at some point and just get all my thoughts and analysis out on each one. That's a pretty big undertaking though, and I haven't started to plan that out yet. One thing I could do is a video similar to this one, but maybe for each story arc or fight in each part, which would let me go through in chronological order and sort of chart each story's highs and lows. So do let me know in the comments if you find that interesting. If you'd like to submit a question, you can join the Patreon or YouTube membership at any tier and leave it in the Patreon community chat or as a reply to the members-only community post on my channel. I try to answer one question per video, so if you have some, feel free to leave as many as you want. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons and members. Thank you to Doorbell, Crayon, Rigovids, Zucato, Pumpkin Doge, Marrow, Sponge Cake, Cakext, Feliciano Rabaja, Rayana Meme, Christian McDonough, Pulse Dog, Rob Goliath, Jacob Smith, Big T, Gold, Red Hot Mayonnaise, Zenkai, Keenan, Perry, Saint Bobo, John Garcia, Crank and Plank, Puffin32, Fran Studios, Shin Megami Tensei Film Reviews, Griffiono, Fiddlehead, Justice, Jowl Marchants, Danilo K, Star the Gunslinger, Mel, Alavai, Kali, Javier's Milk, Billy the Corgi, Joe Jogan, and Time Lord.